In an Egglocke, the rules are the same as a Nuzlocke, where any Pokemon that faints has to be boxed forever. Except, instead of using the first Pokemon I find per route, I have to immediately replace it with an egg sent in from a viewer. Using the hardcore rule set, I'm also not allowed to use items from the bag in battle, or level past the next gym leader's strongest Pokemon. Once my mom has nonchalantly commented on how she moved me to Little Root in the back of a truck, she introduces me to my new dad. Still better than Norman, I guess. From there, I had to replace my starter with a random egg decided by stream chat, of which there were many to choose from since you guys sent in over 2,000 eggs in the first day. Chat decided to go with egg number 1 first, submitted by Wesley25, which hatched into Ryan the Magnemite. And because you guys could submit any ability you wanted, Ryan came with Levitate. I then head to Route 103 to pick up my next encounter to swap for the next egg. This one from user Hypress hatches into a Numel with Water Absorb, which means I just got 2 Pokemon whose abilities patch up their greatest weaknesses. I then pick up another encounter on Route 102, which was swapped and hatched into Joe Thatcher's Heracross. And Hank the Heracross instantly became chat's favorite. I mean, with Defiant, who could possibly dislike this little rebel? I moved on to Route 104, and my next egg hatched into Spectral King's Snubble. Another one of chat's favorites, Steve the Pixelate Snubble, is just too cute. Now you might be thinking that these powerful Pokemon you guys gave me would have no problem steamrolling Omega Ruby, and that would probably be the case if the trainers didn't have completely randomized teams with randomized abilities and an increased chance of having legendaries, which I realized as early as Petalburg Woods would be a very big problem. The Magma Grunt you face is the only mandatory fight in the woods, and of course he had a Zygarde. It was a bit scary missing a couple Megahorns, but in the end Hank came out victorious. Most of all though, this gave me a very bad feeling about what's to come. In fact, as early as the very next mandatory battle versus twins Gina and Mia, my squad of 4 newborns was faced with a Groudon. And without Hank the Destroyer of Legends, I'm pretty sure this would just result in a wipe. Even into Groudon's massive base 140 defense, Megahorn does a ton of damage, and I'm lucky that it targets Magnemite with its ancient power. I'm also very lucky that Hank connects with 2 Megahorns in a row, saving the run basically before it's even started. With the stakes now very clearly set, I hatch my next egg from Jules into Sawaddle, and with the ability Flashfire, we actually have 6 immunities on the team. I also pick up an encounter on Route 116 to round out the team with Diglett from Aragorn 001, and with no guard, this thing could be absolutely crazy since it gets Fissure down the line. And with the 6 immunities on our team, I was feeling incredibly strong going into the first gym fight versus Roxanne. And it didn't make me feel any worse to see her first Pokemon was randomized into a Scatterbug I could easily destroy with an Aerial Ace from Hank. But the same can't exactly be said for Regice. With no fighting moves yet, Hank was not going to be able to do anything here. And 0 of those 6 immunities are of any use at all when staring this thing in the face. Or is it a face? I'm really not sure. I decide to swap out a Hank and send in Johnette the Numel to try and hit this thing with fire moves. But Regice wasn't going to let that happen. I'd managed to defeat the first gym, or really it defeated itself. But it came at the cost of losing one of my Pokemon, and thus letting down one of my subscribers. But I had to stay strong, because this was still only just the beginning. The way the Egglocke rules work, I only get to hatch a new egg when one of my 6 Pokemon faints. So I make sure to pick up an encounter when I arrive in Dewford, and hatching Critchk's egg into Cryogonal. With Superlock, this thing is pretty interesting, and I'm pretty sure I've never used one of these in my life. Because we can't simply box any of our Pokemon, we're stuck with this team of 6 going into the second gym fight versus Brawly. He leads with Lord Helix, which is terrible for Doug the Diglett. So I immediately swap out, sending in Ralph the Sawaddle. The Ammonite sets up using Withdraw, but my Razor Leaf still does a pitiful amount because of a held Rindo Berry. Every single gym leader Pokemon is holding an item, and in this case, it slowed down my KO of this Ammonite by exactly 1 turn. Brawly's second Pokemon is a Tyranitar. Not exactly a legendary, but pseudo-legendary nonetheless. I swap out a Ralph to send in Steve to hopefully nail this thing with a Fairy type move, but Rock Slide deals a ton of damage. And even after getting the health I recover from an Oranberry, there's no way I can stay in. So I swap out into Ryan, hoping it can take a resisted Rock Slide fairly well, but it deals way more damage than I was expecting, and there's no way I can stay in. My last hope is to send in Hank, who isn't weak to Rock, but still doesn't resist it. Heracross doesn't have the craziest bulk, but still manages to get by just above half. Hank then connects with a super effective Megahorn, and to my surprise, it actually takes Tyranitar out in 1 hit. So while While this means I've made it through the fight deathless without any problems, that's actually the problem. Whenever I make it past a gym leader deathless, chat gets to vote on a Pokemon on the team to faint. And in this case, they felt the possibility of No Guard, Fissure, Doug trio to be too strong and voted Douglas off the team. Sorry, Doug. But we weren't without a ground type for very long, since the next egg from Reception hatches into a Golett. And in this case, Levitate's actually probably the ability it should have had in the first place. Facing Watson is always a scary part of the game. Probably the hardest gym in the game unless you picked Mudkip. We're getting a bit deeper into the game and we still don't have evolved Pokemon. And the deeper into the game we get, having to reset due to a wipe becomes more and more devastating. His first Pokemon, Shroomish, however, really isn't a problem, and annoyingly doesn't get one-hit KO'd by an Ice Punch. The worst part is the little bugger's holding a rocky helmet, meaning every time I connect with an Ice Punch, I take a little bit of damage. So once I actually take the thing out with a third Ice Punch, I'm already really deep into the yellow. Disastrously for me, but very fittingly for Watson, his second Pokemon is a Zapdos. Even though Casper's immune to electricity with its ground type, I really don't feel confident staying in at such low health, so I swap to Jake, who takes really a lot of damage from a Pluck. Now that I know what move it's gonna go for, I swap to Ryan, who resists it and barely takes anything. Zapdos then switches it up, going for Thundershock, but it's still resisted, and even as a critical hit, it doesn't do too much damage. This means we can resist both of Zapdos' stabs with Ryan and fire back with a Sonic Boom, always dealing 20 damage. What throws a giant wrench in my otherwise really solid plan is the fact that Zapdos has Roost. This could be a really big problem, since Magnemite doesn't have any good way of getting health back, and I can't use any healing items from the bag. This means as long as Zapdos keeps roosting, I can't out-damage its healing, and it's eventually gonna take Ryan down. Unfortunately, my other Pokemon are either half dead or super weak to flying, so I didn't really feel like I had a better option than staying in until Ryan was almost dead and going for Sonic Booms. With Ryan in range of being KO'd at 2 HP, I expected to go for another Thundershock, so I swapped to Jake the Snowflake. And because of priority Ice Shard, this ends up working out beautifully. My celebration was cut very short, however, since his final Pokemon is Volcarona. But then I remembered that fire is something we're immune to with Flash Fire Ralph. Unfortunately, both of Ralph's stabs don't do anything to Volcarona, so I'm stuck going for Tackle, but at least Leavanny's attack is fairly decent. What really baffled me was Watson's commitment to going for Ember. The AI didn't seem to be learning from its mistakes whatsoever and just kept trying to go for the quad effective move. Not something you'll see me complain about, but because we got through the fight deathless, the lives of my team members were now in your hands. And even though Jake the Flake had just saved the run from Zapdos, chat had made up their mind. So I hatched my next egg from Dolliman98, a Kyurem Black. This thing is a box legendary. It's absolutely insane. Can probably tear apart any game as long as you don't give it normalize. So Bob's just a normal guy like you or me. Steve then finally gets his moment, evolving into Gramble. And before we can take on Flannery, we have a mandatory encounter with Team Magma. And it wouldn't be my luck if I didn't instantly run into trouble when facing Tabitha. His first Pokemon is just a Mischievous, but as we've established, Bob is just a regular guy and definitely can't fight ghosts. My best option is Steve since he's got Bite, and facing a mere Mischievous, what could possibly... As Steve gets locked in by Mean Look, I realize that he's not very fast, and Bite doesn't even get close to being a one-hit KO. What will Steve do? What can Steve do except stare mortality bravely in the face as he meets his imminent demise? A truly cruel fate for one who just managed to evolve. I hate you, Tabitha, you smug piece of shit. With Steve departed, I hatch Jamster's egg into a Lightning Rod Wingull, and in honor of the late Steve, chat named her Stevette. And as pathetic as it is to lose a Pokemon to Tabitha, at least Maxie didn't stand a chance. Meaning our next big challenge would be taking on the 4th gym versus Flannery. Her lead Bonsai was a swift victim of Ryan's Mirror Shot, but unless I swap out, I'll be the one getting cooked versus her Moltres. Expecting to get roasted by a fire move, I swap out into Stevette when Moltres reveals it has Protean. This is very inconvenient for Stevette, since the next turn Moltres goes for Sky Attack, changing into a flying type, which means that Stevette's subsequent Water Pulse deals way less damage, not being super effective. She still manages to pull off both a critical hit and the confusion, so since I know it's gonna go for Sky Attack, I feel pretty confident swapping back into Ryan. The Sky Attack barely does anything, and I swap out into Stevette again to tank the Flamethrower, and since I know Moltres will go for Sky Attack, I can fire off an attacking move, dealing a bit of extra damage with Water Pulse. I then swap Ryan back in again to take the Sky Attack, and my best bet is to just continue doing this until Moltres goes down. So I swap back in Stevette, who at this point can only tank one one more flamethrower, except Flannery woke up that day and chose no mercy. Irresponsibly, I played right into the crit, and the one who had to pay for it was Stevette with her life. I send in Bob to avenge her, and with his immense strength, he takes out what remains of Moltres. But even after dealing with the threat, I still had a lingering pit in my stomach. Had I doomed Stevette by naming her after Steve? The battle was still taking place, so there was no time to dwell on it. Facing a Zoroark, I'd swapped out into Hank to resist its Dark-type move and even get a Defiant boost before crushing it and claiming the gym badge. Stevette was the only casualty, so chat didn't get to vote anyone off, and knowing how much chat loved Steve, it hurt my soul to think about the fact that she would have never been kicked off. With such a sad end to day one, I had to get some rest and come back the next stream. It started with hatching Lost I Am 77's egg into a desolate land Larvesta. Definitely an insane ability for it, but considering this thing evolves later than the Elite 4 level cap, it's pretty much a permanent liability. From there, I had to start making my way through the next set of gym trainers, and speaking of liabilities, I immediately run into a Frostlass, which means Bob can't do anything at all. Obviously, I swap out into Ryan, who can tank a resisted Draining Kiss incredibly well. What I wasn't ready for was the power of Ominous Wind. Just 3 levels before evolving, I'd lost my starter. I'd just been given yet another reason to hate my father, beyond neglecting my mother in favor of his vain gym leader career. To replace Ryan, I hatched an adaptability Torchic from Zigzag, but nothing can truly replace your starter. Sure, mother was having an affair with our handyman Machoke, but any sympathy I'd had for my old man died alongside Ryan. So I was left with no choice but to bring this villain down. He leads with a Noctowl, and I couldn't have possibly led with a worse Pokemon in Ralph. So I swap out into Bob, who very quickly disposes of the bird. But my father is no pushover. I may be Miss Unova, but he too has a Unovan legendary. There's nothing I can swap into a Dragon Pulse that doesn't just instantly get vaporized by a second one. And while Bob is strong and used to be a formidable dragon in his prime, at this point he's just a normal guy, but he's gonna have to step up to the challenge. With Reflect Up, my best bet is going for Dragon Rage to at least deal 40 damage. Having it be disabled by Cursed Body is salt in the wound, since we already know Bob would have to go down. It really sucks to lose my strongest Pokemon, but it had to be done to give me a safe switch. Hank, Killer of Legends, goes for Rock Tomb, but it's not quite enough to take Reshiram down, leaving it deep in the red. I knew this would lead to Hank's demise, but the legend manages to survive on just 1 HP. Chat went off the wall. Their dearest Hank had made it, but the dream of taking out Reshiram with another Rock Tomb was quickly ruined by a Hyper Potion. I even went for Brick Break to take it out in style, but Rock Tomb would have done way more damage. Hank is way too beloved to be left for dead, so I swap out into Greg, who tanks a Flamethrower. But even as a resisted hit, it deals a ton of damage, and a Dragon Pulse would surely take Greg out, so I'm forced to swap out again. The idea is simple, tanking a Dragon Pulse with Ralph, and then baiting Reshiram into going for Flamethrower, which we'll be able to dodge with Flash Fire. There's only one problem with this plan, and it's the fact that Ralph really doesn't have any great moves to hit Reshiram with, so I'm stuck going for Struggle Bug to lower its special attack. The first part of the plan works. Reshiram hits into our Flash Fire, so we get a second turn of going for Struggle Bug and further lowering its special attack. Our father, however, does seem to have a couple more brain cells than Watson, since he at least swaps up his moves, but going for Imprison. I knew outsmarting him wouldn't be that easy, but at least with all the special attack drops, one more Dragon Pulse doesn't take Ralph out. This buys me one more turn to further lower its special attack with Struggle Bug, as Norman goes for a final Gambit in Ancient Power, trying to claw back into the game by getting an Omni Boost. He doesn't manage to get it, but he still takes out Ralph. I send in Hank to finish the job since we know he'll be faster, and he does connect with the Rock Tomb to take out the Reshiram. But my father has one last trick up his sleeve, sending in non-slow start Regigigas. There is nothing else on my team that deals substantial damage to this thing, so I go for Brick Break, but it just isn't enough, even doubling its speed with weak armor. And so my chat and I had to watch in horror as Hank got crushed into pieces. We just lost half of our team and our 3 very best Pokemon, the only consolation being that this boosted Regigigas had to recharge. I'd conquered my father, never to be tormented by his twisted ways ever again. but my victory had come at the bittersweet cost of most that I held dear. Leaving the past in the past, I had 3 new eggs to hatch, starting with a Shuckle from Special Potato with huge power. Great, that'll be so useful, coming off its base attack of 5, but right afterwards we got a much better huge power Pokemon in Skitty. Believe it or not, once it evolves into Delcatty, it actually has stronger base attack than Diggersby. The 3rd egg from Saint Cinny hatched into Simple Natu. With the level cap at 35, we can immediately evolve Brian into Xatu, and all we need to evolve Hanketh the Skitty is to find a Moonstone in Meteor Falls. On my way over there, I accidentally run into a trainer that I skipped before, who of course had a Groudon. In this case, I was saved by the huge level difference, but it just goes to show how important it is to skip these trainers when possible. Finally, in Meteor Falls, I pick up the Moonstone and evolve into Delcatty. And after saving the Weather Institute, we're forced to take on May, who so far has been very underwhelming and shouldn't be a problem at all. I'm able to take out her Crustle with a superpower, which sends in Sceptile. Fine, I'll switch. Anybody else kind of forgot to expect that since Gen 9? I tried to fight back with Greg, but even resisted Leaf Blades were doing really a lot of damage, so I had to swap out again. I send in Brian to resist the Leaf Blade and hopefully go for an Air Slash back, but the big problem is that we still have Pursuit to deal with, and I get hit by a critical hit from Leaf Blade. I can't even swap out to save Brian here since Pursuit would get me either way, so I'm forced to just stay in and let Brian go. It's up to Hanketh to finish the fight, even getting a critical hit Sucker Punch to avenge the Fallen. In need of another 2 Mons, I hatched Keegan the Charmander. With Snow Warning, that really sucks. My 2nd egg hatched into Chad the Munchlax, which we could quickly evolve into Snorlax. Then we just have to beat the gym trainers before we face Winona. Come on! Facing Winona herself was actually pretty smooth for a change. Her biggest threat was a Thundurus, but a simple switch into Chad and I could smush the thing. The only big issue is I didn't have a great switch into Poison Heal Machamp, so I tried to take it out with Larvesta, but Overheat in the Sun wasn't quite enough. Losing Larvesta here is actually kind of convenient, since we don't have to have anything get voted off the team, and Larvesta pretty much can't even evolve throughout the run. In need of a new Pokemon, my next egg hatches into Sheer Force Nidoran. And with the level cap now at 45, I can evolve Keegan into Charizard, Greg into Blaziken, and Jimothy into Nidoking. From here we gotta take on Tate and Liza, who only have 2 Pokemon, so shouldn't be too hard of a fight. But in order to fight them, I first have to get through the gym trainers. And if you're me, my luck means there's no escaping having your Snorlax get guillotined by a Kingler. God damn it. So just before the gym, I hatch another egg from Nicole B, a Moxie Zangoose. And with a team as strong as this, how big a threat could Tate and Liza's 2 measly Pokemon possibly be? Okay, that's bad, but at least with randomized abilities, Kyogre won't set up the rain. You gotta be f***ing kidding me. Well, barring Raichu being some more threatening electric type, this is pretty much as bad as it could be. And as much as it sucks, I'm pretty much forced to just follow through with my original plan and go for Fake Out with Hanketh. It actually deals some pretty good damage, and we at least don't have to deal with Kyogre this turn. Hanketh then gets thundered with 100% accuracy in the rain, and Charlie can at least get poison on the Kyogre. Of course, it gets some of its health back with leftovers before taking a bit of poison damage. The next turn, I swap out of Hanketh, sending in Jimothy the Nidoking. Raichu then goes for Thunder, which doesn't affect Nidoking. It also doesn't matter, since Kyogre connects with an Origin Pulse, instantly annihilating both of my team members. Things are very bad, but at least I have a secret weapon. When submitting an egg of a Pokemon that can Mega Evolve, the Mega Stone for it would come with it, meaning Keegan the Charizard can first come in and get rid of the rain with Snow Warning, and then Mega Evolve into Charizard X to try and resist the Origin Pulse. Despite the rain being gone, Raichu still connects with a Thunder, dealing a ton of damage to Zane. Keegan then goes for Dragon Pulse, since I don't have any other great moves to hit Kyogre with, for 40 damage, and a Muddy Water takes out Zane before he even got to do anything. I send in Greg, and predictably, Tate and Liza heal Kyogre all the way back to full with a Hyper Potion, at least not getting rid of the poison. At least Raichu misses its Hyper Beam, and a Dragon Rage deals 40 damage to Kyogre before Greg buries underground. And at this point, Kyogre is at least taking a ton of toxic damage. Raichu fires another Thunder, and at this point, with all the Snow Chip, it's enough to take out Charizard. Being underground, at least Greg can dodge the Origin Pulse and deal a bit of damage to Kyogre with Dig, which thank Arceus takes it low enough that it goes down to poison. With the biggest threat defeated, I send in Hanketh to go for Fake Out, dealing a bit of chip damage but also giving giving me a free turn. This activates Raichu's Citrus Berry, getting it back a bit of health, and after it flinches, I go for an adaptability Rock Smash with Greg, which is just enough to take Raichu out. We made it out the other side, but I was pretty shaken up. With only 2 team members making it through, I needed 4 new eggs. First, X-Laid Paranoid, Scrappy Kangaskhan, and next, Magic Bull sent me a freaking Rayquaza, with Truant, so like, not that good, but still pretty good. Third was Lizzie sending me a Magic Guard Ralts, and finally Pierce sending me a Contrary Trico. Once again, Maxie with no problem, and only one man stood between me and the Pokémon League. With pretty much a fresh new team, I was ready to take on the one man in my way. As per usual, I start with the worst possible Pokémon, sending in Sceptile versus Pinsir, so I swap out into Greg and get X-Scissored before destroying it with an adaptability Fire Punch, which is when Wallace sends in Yveltal. Bacon Bird is a massive problem for the majority of my team. I begin by swapping in Karen, but quickly realize that she doesn't have any good moves against this thing since I need to have a few HMs to even get to the gym. Pretty much all I can do is fake out and then swap out immediately, this time into Rayquaza. Yveltal goes for Sky Attack again, so I figure Rayquaza's gonna get to use at least one move, but Yveltal is much faster, and my poor lazy Sky Noodle falls the very first fight of its life. Even though he's much slower, I send in Bobbert the Gardevoir, hoping that Yveltal will go for Sky Attack again, which it fortunately does. I then go for Moonblast, which, thank Arceus, takes Yveltal out in one hit. At least we only lost one Pokemon to it. His next Pokemon is Diggersby, and with no good moves to hit it with, I swap out of Bobbert into Florian the Sceptile. I then destroy it with a super effective Leaf Storm, and because of Contrary, it boosts my special attack by 2 stages. Now, unfortunately, Florian does not have Dragon Pulse, so when Wallace sends in his Salamence, I'm definitely forced to swap out. I send in Karen, as Salamence just flies up into the air. She can't really do anything to Mence, so after a couple of flies, she just goes down too. An unfortunate sacrifice to have to make, but at least it gives me a free switch into Hankette, who can start off by going for Fake Out, dealing a little bit of damage, and getting hurt by Rocky Helmet. One thing that chat taught me is you can actually Sucker Punch the first turn of Fly, but I didn't know the first turn. And unfortunately, since Hankette is pretty slow, it put me in a terrible situation, where I now had to swap something in to a Stab Fly from Mence. I decide to send in Bobbert, who can survive a fly, but unfortunately just isn't faster than Salamence. This means he's locked into spending the turn, contemplating his inevitable demise. With Bobbert defeated, half the team had now gone down. I send in Hankette again, going for Fake Out, which just barely misses out on the KO. Wallace then goes for a Hyper Potion, and unfortunately, this turn, I did go for Sucker Punch, meaning I deal no damage whatsoever. I click Sucker Punch again, this time connecting and dealing over half damage to Salamence as it flies up in the air. Once again, I'm in a terrible position, and I can't have Hankette stay in since she's my only chance of beating this thing, which means unfortunately, Florian has to take the hit. So once again, we're down to just Greg and Hankette. I don't even bother going for Fake Out since Sucker Punch takes Salamence out anyway, and that would just lead to me taking more Rocky Helmet damage. Wallace's final Pokemon is Lucario, and unfortunately, it's faster than Blaziken, so I can't switch out, risking the 2-hit KO. With a heavy heart, I realize that I have to let Hankette go. If Greg would have been swapped into that critical hit, he would have definitely gone down, and that would have just straight up lost the run. And while that makes me feel good about switching, the EVs we've collected throughout the run is enough for Greg to just outspeed Lucario. So in a perfect world, we could have swapped Blaziken into a non-crit and been faster anyway. There's so much that went wrong in that battle, and all of my mistakes together means we came out of it with only one Pokemon left. Greg, you and I are going all the way to the end. With a team to assemble before entering Victory Road, I cracked on, first hatching Juan the Halucha from Nightstar Nation. And with no guard to always hit those high jump kicks, he truly is the chosen Juan. Second, I hatched Luxury W's Download Dratini, and they just kept coming with Peter Griffin's No Guard Gibble. Fourth, I was given the incredible Regenerator Rotom Wash. And finally, from To Infinity and Beyond, I got Dark Aura Absol. And with the level cap at 55, I was able to evolve Bob Jr. into Garchomp and just barely evolve Lance into Dragonite. And so I had my final team, Greg the Adaptability Blaziken with Brave Bird Earthquake, Fire Punch, and High Jump Kick. No Guard Halucha, the Chosen One, with High Jump Kick, Flying Press, Power Up Punch, and Stone Edge. Harry, the regenerating Rotom with Volt Switch, Hydro Pump, Shadow Ball, and Will-O-Wisp. Ivar, the Dark Aura Absol with Sucker Punch, Will-O-Wisp, Night Slash, and Psycho Cut. Bob Jr., the No Guard Garchomp with Dragon Claw, Earthquake, Stone Edge, and Crunch. And Lance, the downloading Dragonite with Fire Punch, Extreme Speed, Earthquake, and Thunder Punch. And thus I walked through the gates of the Elite Four, meaning there's no turning back. Facing the final gauntlet, I had no idea what to expect, and instantly Sydney sends out a Mew. I decide my best blind lead is to go with Harry, since that way I can go for Volt Switch, which really ends up working out in this case since the Mew goes for Transform, allowing me to hit for a fairly powerful Volt Switch and then swap out into Bob Jr. Because the abilities are randomized, it's unlikely the Rotom has Levitate, so I can just take it out with a super effective Earthquake. Sydney sends in Mamoswine second, obviously threatening out Bob Jr., so I swap out into Greg. It would suck to get hit by an Earthquake, but Mamo goes for Blizzard on the Switch, dealing about a third of my health, but the next turn an Adaptability Fire Punch is way more than Mamoswine can handle. Thirdly, Sydney sends in Primeape. At this low health, I really don't want to take more damage with Greg, so I send in the Chosen One. I'm struck with a resisted Cross Chop, but the Chosen One shrugs it off and takes out Primeape the next turn with a super effective Flying Press. Sydney's fourth Pokemon is a Klefki with Download, getting a special attack boost, meaning I really don't want to get hit by a Draining Kiss, so I swap out into Harry. Instead, Klefki just goes for Magic Room, stopping me from using items, but you barely get any good items in these games anyway, so that doesn't matter, and I burn it with a Will-O-Wisp the following turn as it goes for Heal Block. I then actually connect with a Hydro Pump, which is just enough to take Klefki out. Finally, Sydney's last Pokemon is Hydreigon, and being at full health, I decide to just stay in as it goes for Dragon Rush, basically confirming this is a physical Hydreigon, meaning my Will-O-Wisp pretty much completely destroys it. Because the next Dragon Rush basically can't hurt me, I decide to go for Volt Switch instead of just hard switching. Doing this means I swap at the end of the turn, which just makes it so that I don't have to take any damage at all as I send in the Chosen One. With no guard, I don't even have to hold my breath. High Jump Kick is guaranteed to connect, and we win the first Elite Four fight. Our second opponent is Phoebe, leading with a Nidoqueen, which is incredibly bad for my default lead, Harry. Fearing the ground type move, I swap out right away into Lance and get a special attack boost with Download, which is completely useless. But even without the boost, Dragonite manages to take out Nidoqueen with a single Earthquake. Arcanine comes in second, but because it doesn't have Intimidate, I decide to just stay in, go for another Earthquake, which also takes it out in one hit. Delphox is third, and unfortunately a bit faster than Dragonite, meaning I get burned, and thus my subsequent Earthquake doesn't quite do enough to take it out. Now expecting a Psychic, I swap out of Lance and send in Ivar, however, Phoebe just goes for a full restore to heal up back to full. Here I was fearing the Will-O-Wisp, so I didn't go for Sucker Punch, but unfortunately, I get punished and burned by the Flamethrower too. This means my Night Slash just barely misses out on the KO, and Phoebe goes for another full restore, which means I don't get to connect with Sucker Punch, and I'm taken deep into the red by burn, and then forced to switch. After that sad interaction, I send in Bob Jr. to tank a Flamethrower, and thank Arceus I don't get burned. Of course, I do get crit, but I'll take what I can get, and then take out Delphox with an Earthquake the next turn. Third out is Wailord, and sadly, it's got Drizzle. This is very bad news, since a really strong Water Spout is incoming, so I swap out into Harry to tank it, and it still deals a ton of damage. The next turn, I go for Volt Switch just to power down that Water Spout by taking down Wailord's HP a bit, and it actually almost takes it out. I Volt Switch into Dragonite, once again getting a useless special attack boost from Download as the Wailord just goes for Amnesia. Despite the burn, the Wailord is so low that an Extreme Speed is all I need to take it out, leaving Phoebe with her final Pokemon, Yanmega. Since Dragonite is burned, I swap out into Harry, who has to tank an Air Slash. Yanmega then goes for Bug Buzz, basically revealing it doesn't have Giga Drain, which is very good for Harry, as I go for Will-O-Wisp, when probably I really should have just gone for Volt Switch. Since Yanmega only has 95 base speed and not speed boost, I swap into Bob Jr. and get Bug Buzzed. With no boost to its speed, I will be faster, and due to no guard, I can never miss Stone Edge, which I have to say is one of the best feelings ever. Our third opponent is Glacia, coming into the battle hot with a legendary Cobalion. Once again, going in blind to these fights, I didn't have a better option but to lead with Harry. Cobalion starts out by boosting its attack with Swords Dance, as I just go for Will-O-Wisp, completely negating that boost. Cobalion then strikes with +2 Sacred Sword, which doesn't even do half with a critical hit, as I go for Volt Switch for a bit of damage and swapping out. This lets me swap in the Chosen One at the very end of the turn, so he doesn't have to take any damage. Glacia heals up with a full restore, and with Cobalion's massive defense, it actually manages to survive, so I take the opportunity to finish it off with a Power-Up Punch to get a +1 boost to my attack. Gardevoir comes in second, and because I can't can't miss, there's no risk to just firing off a +1 Stone Edge to take it out in one hit. Politoed comes in next, and at +1, I could have probably taken it out, but I was afraid this thing might have something like Ice Beam, so I decided to swap out into Harry. I then connect with a super effective Volt Switch to swap out and deal over half damage to Politoed, switching into Ivar, who gets hit by a Parental Bond Hyper Voice. I then swap out again since Politoed's about to have its Perish counter go to 1, this time swapping into Harry, who unfortunately gets confused by Swagger. The AI sadly isn't dumb enough to just let Politoed go down, and she swaps into Crocodile, which conveniently can't be hit by Volt Switch, but I end up hitting myself in confusion anyway. Conveniently, a super effective Earthquake against Harry can't connect with the Chosen One, and I can just finish off Crocodile with High Jump Kick. Politoed then comes in again, and I do what I should have just done in the first place and High Jump Kick it to death. Finally, her last Pokemon is Kricketune of all things, so I swap out into Blaziken and finish it off with a Fire Punch for the victory. And so, there was only one man standing between me and taking on the champion. Drake starts out strong, sending in a Flygon, which is terrible for Harry, who doesn't have Intimidate, so I swap out into Juan in order to dodge the Earthquake. I strike the Flygon with a non-missable High Jump Kick, which doesn't quite finish the job, but it just sets up Sandstorm, and then Drake decides to heal. My second High Jump Kick isn't enough to take Flygon out again, and tragically gets me paralyzed through Static. Dragon Claw deals a ton of damage, but at least I don't go down to a crit, and Flying Press finishes off the stupid Bug Dragon. Vivian comes in second, and I really don't want to get hit by a Hurricane, so I swap out into Bob Jr., who also has no guard, so I'm hit by Hurricane. At the very least, I don't get confused, and the next turn I can finish off Vivian with a non-missable quad-effective Stone Edge. Problematically, Drake then brings in his very own Garchomp, so once again, I've got to switch, sending in Harry. Harry is struck by a Dragon Claw, but this way I can bait an Earthquake and swap out into Dragonite. Of course, it's tradition to get a completely useless special attack boost as the Garchomp goes for Dig. Realizing I can just get a free hit in, I stay in, but sadly, I don't have any Dragon moves, so Earthquake's gonna have to do the trick. Now predicting a Dragon Claw, I can swap out into Harry, who's gotten all of its health back with Regenerator. I do this to bait a Dig and swap in Dragonite for free. Repeating this process a few times through a couple of full restores allowed me to finally defeat Garchomp with an Earthquake. Drake's fourth Pokemon is an Aerodactyl, so I swap out of Dragonite back into Harry, who once again has healed back up to full because of Regenerator. Aerodactyl hits with Ancient Power and luckily doesn't get the Omni Boost, which could possibly end the run on the spot. Harry's hit with Takedown and then goes for Will-O-Wisp, basically resigning Aerodactyl to only using Ancient Power. I then swap back into Dragonite, finally getting its very first attack boost from download, and I get hit by Ancient Power, which once again luckily doesn't get the Omni Boost, even the third time it's used. I then connect with a Thunder Punch, which is lights out for Aerodactyl. And what would the final Pokemon standing in between me and the champion be, except a Groudon? I really wanted to have all 6 of my Pokemon going into the champion fight since I have no idea what I'm gonna face. For this reason, I play it safe, swapping out of Dragonite into Harry as the Groudon goes for Eruption. Baiting it into Earthquake, I swap into the Chosen One, who can dodge it with its flying typing. And because I really didn't want to lose anything to this Groudon, I resorted to one of the lamer strategies in Nuzlocke's PP stalling. Because Harry gets its health back every single time we swap into a fire move, there's really no risk ever, and I can just continuously swap between these two to resist or just be immune to the hit until Groudon runs out of Earthquakes. Once it had wasted its 10 Earthquake PP, I swapped into Dragonite to see if it had any other ground moves. After getting another useless special attack boost, I'm hit by Flamethrower, making me think this thing has no ground moves left, right? I then swap into Rotom, thinking this is completely safe, and Groudon once again goes for Flamethrower. Crazily enough, Rotom is simply faster, and I could have just Will-O-Wisped at the very start of the fight. But my heart skipped a whole beat as the Groudon went for Earth Power, which luckily wasn't enough to take Rotom out. With this new knowledge, I go back to swapping between Harry and Juan. Once Groudon is taken enough damage from the burn, I swap out into Garchomp and simply finish off the rest of its health with an Earthquake. It sure wasn't pretty, but at least we didn't lose any Pokemon to this stupid Groudon. With the full team intact and Greg still with me, we'd made it all the way to the champion. This fight would decide the fate of the run, and I had to avenge all of our fallen comrades. For Hank, for Steve, for Stevette, for Bob, and for Hankette, I had to win. I knew Steven would be a tough opponent to crack, but we've made it too far to lose now. Leading with Regirock, I got flashbacks from our very first gym fight. So I made sure to use Will-O-Wisp to burn the Regirock before being struck by the inevitable explosion. With the burn restricting Regirock's attack power, it barely deals any damage to Harry at all, and he's already one Pokemon down. Steven sends in Gallade second, which should have made me suspicious it might have Leaf Blade, but I stay in and go for a Will-O-Wisp, which at least allows me to survive the Leaf Blade. I then swap out of Harry, sending in the Chosen One. Gallade just goes for Leaf Blade again, but because it's resisted, it barely deals any damage at all. I then go for a Flying Press, which unfortunately isn't enough to take Gallade out because it's also Fighting type and Gallade is Psychic. However, Gallade fails to KO with Psycho Cut and goes down to its own Life Orb, sending in Spiritomb. My Fighting type can't do much to this thing, so I swap out into Bob Jr. This ended up being a horrible idea since Bob Jr. has no guard. Since after dealing a bit of damage with Earthquake, Spiritomb goes for the 60% accurate Hypnosis, which of course always hits with no guard. With Garchomp snoozing, there's not much it can do, so I swap out into Greg. This way, the Dream Eater can't do anything, and I can finish off the Spiritomb the next turn with an Adaptability Fire Punch. Steven then sends in Mewtwo, which is terrible for Greg, but luckily I've got a great switch in Ivar. The Psychic of course does nothing to my Dark type, but I also learned Mewtwo has no other attacking moves than Psychic. This means as long as I keep Absol alive to fight Mewtwo, I can't lose to it. Steven switches in an Infernape, which takes huge damage on the switch from a critical hit Night Slash, but then I'm forced to swap out, sending in Dragonite. Finally, Download also gives me that perfect attack boost as Infernape hits me with close combat. This of course also lowers Infernape's defenses, allowing me to very easily take it out the next turn with an Extreme Speed, revealing something I wasn't expecting. Steven's Mega Pokemon randomized into Mega Rayquaza, and I'm the unlucky idiot who has to face this thing at the end of a Nuzlocke. There's nothing I can swap into this thing. Not a single Pokemon on my team can take a single hit. With my download boost, at least Extreme Speed deals pretty good damage, almost taking Rayquaza below half. And of course, Dragonite gets absolutely destroyed by Outrage. Here was my chance to try and go for Dark Aura Sucker Punch with Ivar, but what I ended up doing was a huge mistake. What you see before you is a man in disbelief. You're looking at a guy who thought for sure that Absol Mega evolves into a Dark Fairy type. And it just doesn't. It's a straight up Dark type. What's even worse to know is that Dark Aura Sucker Punch could have never KO'd in the first place. At least the Rayquaza did get confused, so it's all up to the Chosen One. If I can just connect with a Stone Edge, but Mega Rayquaza breaks through, and with Extreme Speed, Rayquaza ends the prophecy. With Quaza still confused, I could burn it, but it breaks through once again and takes out Harry with an Outrage. At this point, I only have 2 Pokemon left, and one of them's asleep. Finally, Rayquaza actually hits itself in confusion, but because I continue to snooze, I still lose. Bob Jr. falls just as Bob and Bobbert did before him. At the end of the road, I stand here as promised, together with Greg, but it's not the ending either of us were hoping for. With one final Outrage, Mega Rayquaza needs no boosts and no critical hits to crush my dream of becoming the champion. 4 hours into the stream, and all I wanted to do was go to bed. My soul had been crushed, but even so, I knew there was only one thing to do. Once again greeted by my loving stepdad Machoke, I needed to once again assemble a team. I started by replacing my starter Mudkip with a Mudkip, except this one from Random Loser has Sapsipper. I then hatched some other awesome additions like Technician Sock and Snow Warning Shedinja. Yeah, okay, that one sucks. But Intimidate Archon is an absolute beast. I made my way to the first gym, and this time I wasn't gonna be fooled. I knew Regice was gonna explode, but this time I had a couple of ghost types, so I sent in Jeff. And because you don't take any end of turn effect damage when you win, Jeff actually makes it through the fight. As for Brawly, both his Ammonite and Tyranitar get absolutely absolutely clapped by Sock. Part of what was making things go so much smoother this time around is I knew what I was gonna be up against, so I could prepare before the fights and not be blindsided. Sadly, once I defeated Watson Deathless, you guys decided Sock had to go. And so, my arch nemesis was upon me. I once again had to face Tabitha. And somehow, things once again immediately go south as Arkin gets confused the very first turn. I decide to swap out and send in my dark type James, who at this point is my most important team member since I'll need a dark type to take on Mewtwo. James instantly gets locked in and hit by a Hex, after which I can destroy Mischievous with a Bite. Because I get a Moxie boost, I figured I can stay in against Solrock. However, James ends up being slower and falls to a critical hit Rock Slide. And just like that, I lost part of my win condition, so if I could ever get my hands on another dark type, I'd be holding on tight. And luckily for me, that's kinda what happens right away when I hatch Captain Blaze's Shell Armor Larvitar. Flannery was a piece of cake since my team could handle fire flying types incredibly well, which means I once again have to face my father, and I wouldn't exactly say I'm the luckiest person in the world. Jack's special defense is 58. Dwayne's special defense is 39, and we took half. So theoretically we shouldn't die. We do die to a crit. We have to do it and just hope for the best here. Dwayne, don't die. Just don't die. I mean, listen, my bad luck is just tragic. At least from there, I had a Ghost type in Litwick to swap into Regigigas Giga Impact, which seems to be the only move it has, netting me a swift victory. Winona was just as easy as last time. Hilariously, my next egg then hatched into Deoxy's Speed with the ability Stall, making it completely useless. And so I'd made it back to face the deadly twins Tate and Liza. And this time the fight went a whole lot better. Okay, maybe not that well. I still lost half of my team, but you know what? We made it through. It wasn't ideal, but I did still have my starter. With Wallace to prepare for, I hatched another few eggs, getting a Victory Star Beldum. I also got a Protean Chimchar. Then finally, Moxie Drillbur to round out the team. This time, Wallace wasn't gonna devastate my squad. Aaron the Furcoat Aggron handled the Veltal nicely. I did have to sack it against Diggersby since Swampert was at very low health from fighting Pinsir, and our team is cripplingly weak to ground. And with Metagross, we easily win the Pseudo Showdown versus Salamence. Finally, with Aggron fainted, we hatched Keyget the Charmander, this time with Drought. And so, with some hard work, I'd made it to the Elite Four again the very next day. My team consisting of Jack, the Sap Sipper Swampert, with Waterfall, Earthquake, Rock Slide, and Hammer Arm. Chuck, the Shell Armor Tyranitar, with Earthquake, Rock Slide, Ice Fang, and Crunch. Keyget, the Drought Charizard, with Flamethrower, Solar Beam, Overheat, and Air Slash. Wilbur, the Moxie Excadrill, with Earthquake, Rock Slide, Dig, and I did teach it Ironhead. Lee, the Protean Infernape, with Earthquake, Flare Blitz, Close Combat, and Acrobatics. And finally Steven, the Victory Star Metagross, with Earthquake, Hammer Arm, Bullet Punch, and Meteor Mash. With such a stacked team, going into the fight versus Sydney, I was actually kind of worried about his Mew transforming into one of my Pokemon. To get around it, I start by sending in Metagross and just letting it transform into me, which it gets to do for free since I miss Hammer Arm. I then swap out into Keyget, who resists every single one of Metagross's moves and can take it out with a sun-boosted Flamethrower. For Primeape, I simply swap to Infernape and take it out with Stab Acrobatics. Mamoswine's conveniently next, being taken out by Close Combat. To handle Klefki, I simply swap to Steven, taking it out with a few Steel moves. Lastly, I've got to deal with Hydreigon, which can't even take me out with a crit Crunch, allowing me to one-shot it with Hammer Arm. We move on to Phoebe, and this time I know she leads with Nidoqueen. So I simply lead with Excadrill, taking it out with an Earthquake. This baits in the dreaded Drizzle Wailord, so I swap in Keyget to get rid of the sun, and even so, I take really a lot of damage from Water Spout. I really wasn't sure if a Solar Beam would KO, so I swap out into Jack, who can tank the Water Spouts great now that the sun's up. A single Earthquake later, and Wailord is done for, probably because it was a critical hit. Delphox comes in next, but with Jack at such high health, I can stay in and tank a Psychic, and just clap back with an Earthquake, taking it out in one shot. Yanmega's next, so I swap to Metagross, taking it out with a Meteor Mash Bullet Punch combo. For her Arcanine, I sent in Chuck, and destroyed it with one an Earthquake. With knowledge of the E4 members' teams, they'd easily made it to Glacia, and her lead Cobalion stands no chance against a sun-boosted Flamethrower from Charizard. Gardevoir is next, so I swap to Steven, who KOs it in one single Meteor Mash, which, because of Victory Star, is exactly 100% accurate. Crocodile is by far the biggest threat on our team, so I swap out into Keyget to dodge the Earthquake. I then swap to Swampert, since this means I just have to take a less powerful move, but Crocodile just goes for Scary Face. This also works out perfectly so that I swap in Swampert when the sun fades. I do have to take an Earthquake, but it only does about a third, and with one single Waterfall I can take Crocodile out. Again, we have to deal with the stupid Politoed, but this time I just go for a couple of Earthquakes, which handles it nicely. Finally, she's got Cricketune, but a swap to Steven and one Meteor Mash does the job, leaving only Drake. Drake's Groudon is by far the biggest issue in the Elite Four since our team is so cripplingly weak to ground. But first, we've got to deal with his lead Flygon, so I send in Lee, who's weak to Earthquake. But only initially, since changing its type to Flying with Protean means we don't take any damage from Earthquake at all. He goes for a full restore, but another couple Acrobatics is all it takes to defeat Flygon, sending in his Groudon. Now that Infernape's a flying type, it won't go for one of its ground moves, so I decide to swap in Chuck to tank a Flamethrower and bait one of those ground moves. Now that I know it'll go for Earthquake or Earth Power, I swap out into Keyget, who can dodge it with its flying type and set up the sun. The next turn, I launch a Solar Beam, which is just enough to take Groudon out in one hit. With the biggest threat out of the way, he now sends in Aerodactyl, so I definitely have to swap out of Keyget, going into Jack. It takes a couple of full restores, but eventually the sun disappears and a single Waterfall is enough to take it out. His second to last Pokemon is Vivian, boosting up its stats with a Quiver Dance, but that won't matter when it instantly goes down to a quad-effective Rock Slide. Finally, there's his Garchomp, which I really don't want to swap anything into, but my guy seriously digs into an Earthquake, so that problem kind of solved itself. Finally, I was back, and this time I wasn't gonna let the victory slip through my fingers. I had lost 39 Pokemon throughout the span of my 2 attempts. That's more than any run has ever taken from me before. So this time, if I could help it, I wasn't gonna let Steven take any more. Bring it on, Rock Boy. This time I knew every single one of Steven's dirty strategies, including his lead exploding Regirock. And because of that, I knew exactly how to counter it. By teaching Swampert Protect before the fight, I could guarantee I don't take any damage at all, and making this fight a 5 against 6. With Regirock defeated, he once again sends in Gallade next, obviously seeing the KO with Leaf Blade, but missing that Jack has Sap Sipper. So instead of taking me out, he boosted my attack to +1, which still isn't enough to take Gallade out in one hit. Steven heals up with a full restore, but this time Jack gets a higher roll with Waterfall, taking Gallade out in one hit. His next Pokemon is his own Infernape. As it comes in, it traces my Sap Sipper, but that won't really help it against Jack. It tries for a close combat, not even dealing half damage, and lowering its defenses in the process, making it that much easier for Jack to take it out with an Earthquake. But with Infernape defeated, I was about to face what I just lost to. By keeping both Tyranitar and Metagross alive, my chances against Rayquaza were drastically better than last time. For a moment I froze, unable to shake how it so mercilessly destroyed me in the last attempt. I then go for Protect again to scout what move it wants to use. Seeing Outrage, I figure my best bet is to swap out into Steven. And with Metagross's insane bulk and a resistance to Dragon, I actually tank it fairly well. Rayquaza is unable to change up its moves and is locked into Earthquake, which doesn't quite do enough to take me out with another one, but just to make sure, I gave Steven a Citrus Berry. And hope returned to my soul when seeing that Meteor Mash did just over half. With the healing from the Citrus Berry, we're able to tank the next Outrage, being a critical hit. And then, with a second 100% accurate Meteor Mash, we finally take down the Sky Snake. But even though we've defeated our greatest nemesis, we still have to deal with the rest of his Pokemon. I don't want to be KO'd by Dark Pulse or Shadow Ball, so I swap out into Keyget, who sets up the sun. Spiritomb then connects with Dark Pulse, but doesn't even do half. I give Keyget the honor of being our Mega Evolution, and because Keegan already got to be Mega Charizard X, she turns into Mega Charizard Y. And with both the sun and the inflated stats from Mega Evolving, this overheat is an overkill. And with Spiritomb defeated, Champion Steven only has one Pokemon left. His Psychic-bound Mewtwo, and because I kept Larvitar alive all the way back since Lava Ridge, which I'm very glad I did since I didn't hatch a single other Dark type, we are now guaranteed the Deathless victory. And I gotta say, I was very relieved to not rack up a 40th death in the run. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how I did it. That's how I beat a Pokemon Omega Ruby hardcore Egglocke, which all happened live on Twitch. So if you want to see the next one, which I plan on doing in March in Ultra Sun and Moon, give me a follow over on Twitch, and of course don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube. And until we see each other next time, they call me Antler Boy, cause my bars are live. Your rhymes as dead as your Pokemon, you might need a revive. You know my flow's on fire. I hit like I'm a champ with guts, so I'ma ride this beat to victory. And you can ride on these nuts.